If you had asked me 6 months ago how I thought my sister's graduation party would go, I would have given you the same polite answer I always used. Oh, I'm sure it'll be lovely. That was who I used to be, easygoing, agreeable, careful not to make anyone uncomfortable. I learned early on that my role in the Engel family was to keep myself small so Sabrina could shine. But that night, the night she graduated, something inside me shifted so sharply it felt like the sound of porcelain cracking. Quiet, clean, permanent. My name is Debra Engel. I'm 25 years old, and I can pinpoint the exact moment the last thread holding me to my family snapped. It was when I stood in our driveway and watched my parents hand my younger sister the keys to a brand new silver Honda Civic while I was still making payments on a scratched up 2008 hatchback I'd been patching together for years. And it wasn't the car that did it, at least not on its own. It was everything that had led to that moment, every overlooked effort, every minimized achievement, every subtle dismissal that had built up over a decade and decided to detonate all at once. To understand how deeply that night cut, you need the history. I'm the oldest of two daughters. Sabrina, at 18, was the quintessential golden child captain of her dance team honor roll student, the type of girl who always got extra credit simply for existing. She had a bright laugh, people described as infectious, though it often felt more like she was performing. Adults adored her. Neighbors raved about her. My parents treated her like she was made of stardust. When we were younger, I used to joke about it. What's next, a pony? I'd laugh when she got an elaborate American Girl doll while I unwrapped a 3-pack of socks. Back then, I thought it was typical younger sibling favoritism that would even out someday. I wasn't a troublemaker. I did well enough in school, worked part-time, graduated with a computer science degree, landed a solid IT job, and moved home for a while to save money. I contributed to bills when things got tight, cleaned, cooked, stepped in, wherever I was needed. I didn't demand praise. I didn't even expect it. But over time, something shifted. My milestones became background noise, while Sabrina's smallest accomplishments were treated like breaking news. When I landed my first full-time job, my mother didn't even look up from her phone when she said, "That's nice, Debra." But when Sabrina got accepted to a college that wasn't even her top choice, they took her out for steak and posted a slideshow of her on Facebook with a caption full of emojis and words like brilliant and so proud. I knew it shouldn't bother me. I told myself I didn't need applause, that I was a grown woman with a career and goals. But the more it happened, the more invisible I felt, like I could be working twice as hard and still never be anything more than the supporting character in the story of Sabrina's life. As her senior year approached, everything became about her college tours, dance fittings, scholarship brunches. I kept my head down and focused on saving money, fixing my old car, and doing the everyday things that kept the house running. When my mother worked late, I made dinner. When Dad forgot to take out the trash, I handled it. I didn't complain. But even then, the responses stung. "Why don't you go out more?" Dad said once. "You're always here." Another time, I overheard Mom telling Aunt Valerie Debra's fine, just kind of floating through life. Sabrina's the one really going places. I was working 40-hour weeks and doing freelance work on the side, but apparently that didn't count because it didn't make for cute Instagram posts. Still, I told myself it would pass. Once Sabrina went off to college, maybe things would reset. Maybe without her soaking up every ounce of attention, we'd all finally breathe normally again. Then came the graduation party. Mom had been planning it for months. What was supposed to be a modest backyard gathering slowly mutated into a full-blown catered event with tent rentals, a live band, custom decorations, and a cake shaped like Sabrina's university crest. I didn't complain once. I moved boxes, set up tables, helped Dad with the grill, and strung lights across the yard because, Debra, honey, you're good with your hands. I spent hours sweating in the heat while Sabrina got her hair and nails professionally done so she could look perfect in the photos. When guests arrived, relatives I hadn't seen in years, they swarmed around Sabrina like she had personally cured a disease. Dad wore a shirt with her college's logo. Mom hovered like a proud tour guide. I tried to stay busy manning the grill, refilling drinks, making sure everything ran smoothly. No one asked me to do these things. I simply knew no one else would. Around sunset, Dad tapped his glass for a toast. I stepped away from the grill, wiping my hands, expecting the typical sentimental speech. It began that way, We've watched Sabrina grow into such a bright, talented, driven young woman. He went on about her achievements, her leadership, her future. I waited for the part where he'd mention me something simple, just acknowledging his other daughter. That part never came. Mom raised her glass and said, "To our shining star." Everyone cheered. Sabrina beamed. And then Dad announced a surprise. He opened the garage door to reveal a brand new Honda Civic with a giant red bow. Sabrina screamed with joy. People clapped. Cameras flashed. My parents cried. In the middle of all that celebration, my mother turned to me, pressed a plastic dustpan into my hand, and said loud enough for several people to hear, "Debra, sweetheart, could you sweep the patio before people track dirt inside?" This is more your level. More my level. My cheeks burned. Sabrina laughed so hard she snorted, and in that moment, holding that cheap dustpan while my sister was handed a new car, it felt like the culmination of years of quiet dismissal, each one landing on top of the last until the weight finally became unbearable. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even finish the sweeping. I walked into the house, went upstairs, packed a duffel bag, and left. No one noticed I was gone until the next morning. 2 days later, the messages started rolling in. "Where are you? We didn't mean it that way. Please talk to us." But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel obligated. I felt clear, coldly, painfully clear. I wasn't just leaving home. I was finally done being invisible. Stop! I spent the first few days after leaving home bouncing between confusion, exhaustion, and the strange kind of numb relief that comes from stepping out of a room you didn't realize had been suffocating you. I crashed on my friend Daniel's couch. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a blanket and said I could stay as long as I needed. In a way, his quiet acceptance felt more like family than anything I'd experienced in years. I read every message from my parents during that time, every half apology and half accusation, but I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because anything I said would have dragged me back into a conversation where I'd be expected to smooth things over, and I had nothing left to smooth. A few weeks passed. I found a rhythm, sort of. Work kept me afloat, and freelance projects filled the nights when sleep refused to come. The graduation party lingered in my mind like a bruise I couldn't stop touching. But the sting was fading into something colder, something that felt a lot like resentment. Then July arrived thick with heat and the kind of neighborhood nostalgia that always accompanied 4th of July. When I still lived at home, the 4th was practically a holiday tradition, block parties, fireworks, the smell of charcoal drifting between houses. This year, I planned to let the day pass like any other. Daniel was spending the weekend with his girlfriend, and I was content to stay in red and avoid anything involving sparklers or Engel family rituals. But on the morning of July 3rd, I got the text, "We're doing a small family dinner tomorrow. Just us. No pressure, but we'd love for you to stop by. Sabrina asked if you'd come." The part about Sabrina struck me as strange. Sabrina never asked about me. Still, a tiny, naive piece of me, one I would later resent, wondered if maybe they genuinely wanted to talk. Maybe the dustpan moment had finally embarrassed them as much as it embarrassed me. Maybe for the first time in years, they wanted to listen instead of perform. I drove over around 6 p.m. on the 4th, a 6-pack of root beer in hand, the most neutral peace offering I could think of. When Mom opened the door, her surprise was so visible that she froze for a second before forcing a smile. "Oh, you came. Well, you invited me," I said. She stepped aside. "Right, of course." The house smelled like charcoal and coleslaw. Dad was by the grill flipping burgers. Sabrina sat at the patio table wearing sunglasses and scrolling through her phone like royalty, bored at her own coronation. No one looked particularly thrilled to see me. The atmosphere felt sterile, like they were performing family dinner for an invisible audience. "Hey," I said as I walked outside. Dad gave me a stiff nod. "Look who decided to show up." Sabrina didn't look up from her phone. Wow, a miracle. I ignored the sarcasm and sat down. We ate in awkward silence. Small talk about weather gas prices, Sabrina's dorm assignment. Not a single question about where I'd been staying or how I'd been doing. No reference to the party, no acknowledgement that anything had happened at all. At some point, I realized they hadn't invited me to talk. They'd invited me to pretend. But I wasn't interested in pretending. Eventually, I set down my fork and spoke. "Look, I just want to say something. I'm not here to fight. I just need you to understand that what happened at the party, it hurt. More than you seem to realize." Mom's jaw tightened. Debra, it was a joke. A joke, I repeated. You handed me a dustpan in front of 30 people and told me it was more my level. Dad let out a dismissive breath. You're being sensitive. No, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm being honest. And it's not just that moment. It's years of this. Years of being treated like background noise while Sabrina gets celebrated for breathing. Sabrina finally looked up, her lips curled into a smirk. Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. You're just still mad you didn't get a car. I stared at her. It's not about the car. Then what is it? She shot back, folding her arms. You want a gold star for being average? The words hit harder than I expected. For a second, I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly. I looked between my parents, expecting, even hoping for one of them to correct her to say she'd gone too far. Dad kept chewing. Mom stared down at her plate. That was the moment I realized they'd never defend me, not even against their own cruelty. I stood abruptly. The chair scraped the patio. Thanks for dinner. Mom called after me, something half scolding and half pleading. But I didn't turn back. I walked straight to my car and drove away, my chest tight and my eyes burning not with tears, but with a kind of clarity I'd never felt before. The next week passed in silence. No calls, no texts, no apologies. I thought maybe that was the end of it. But then came the phone call that changed everything. It was from my bank. The representative's tone was polite but cautious. We're calling to confirm a few recent charges from your old joint account. My stomach dropped. Joint account. What joint account? It was opened several years ago with a parent listed as co-owner. Suddenly I remembered. The account from college. The one meant for groceries and emergencies. The one I hadn't touched in 2 years. The representative proceeded to list charges, expensive boutique clothes, spa packages, sushi dinners, even a weekend cabin booking. Over $1,100. I didn't authorize any of that, I said. We suspected that, she replied. We're freezing the account for now. After hanging up, I sat in my car with the engine off, staring at the empty passenger seat as the shock drained into something darker. Hope, denial, anger, disgust. It all churned at once. But still I told myself it could be a misunderstanding. Maybe Mom thought it was still hers. Maybe it was a one-time thing. The next day I checked the full activity log. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't even recent. They had been using that account for weeks. And one of the purchases included a gift receipt addressed to Sabrina. A gift for her, paid with my money. That was the moment the last piece of my old self dissolved. Not dramatically, not with rage, but with a steady, icy understanding. They didn't just overlook me. They used me, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. In the days after discovering the charges on my old joint account, I found myself moving through the world like someone walking underwater, slow, disoriented, numb around the edges. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would have given me direction. Instead, I felt hollow, as if the betrayal had drained something essential from me. I'd always known my family played favorites. I'd always known Sabrina's needs came first and mine came last. But using my money without asking, without acknowledging it, without even a hint of guilt, made something shift in me. They hadn't just ignored me. They expected me to fund their life in the background silently, indefinitely. I tried to go about my days as normal. I kept working, answering emails, attending virtual meetings, smiling politely at coworkers through a screen when necessary. But any free moment I had, my thoughts drifted back to that account, those purchases, those receipts with Sabrina's name on them like a signature of entitlement. I slept in odd, fractured intervals, 3 hours here, 2 hours there. I'd wake up in Daniel's small apartment, the sound of traffic humming through the thin walls, and stare at the ceiling while replaying years of memories I had once brushed aside. The time they forgot my birthday because Sabrina had a dance showcase. The time I bought groceries and Mom waved it off as showing off. The Christmas where Sabrina got a MacBook and I got a flannel shirt 2 sizes too small. The time they borrowed my car without asking and returned it with the tank empty. Each memory resurfaced with a new, sharper meaning. I had been making excuses for them for years, disguising their neglect as normal family behavior. Daniel noticed before I said anything. He always did. You good? He asked one night as we sat across from each other at his tiny kitchen table, the dim overhead light flickering like it was deciding whether or not to give up. I'm fine, I lied, poking at a bowl of microwave pasta. You're eating like someone's forcing you at gunpoint, he said, raising an eyebrow, and you've barely slept all week. He wasn't wrong. But I didn't know how to explain the exhaustion, the emotional weight pressing down on me so heavily that even simple decisions felt like wading against a current. I didn't want to burden him with the messiness of my family, especially when he'd already given me a place to sleep without hesitation. "Work stress," I muttered. "It'll pass." He didn't push, but his silence said he didn't believe me. That night, after he went to bed, I sat on his small balcony, overlooking the dimly lit parking lot. The air was warm, humming with cicadas. For the first time in a long time, I admitted something to myself. I wasn't just hurt. I was ashamed that I had let them treat me this way, ashamed that a small part of me still wanted their approval, even as they drained my account behind my back. It took several days before the shame morphed into clarity. When it did, it came not with fire, but with a strange calm. I opened my laptop and started taking back the parts of my life they had quietly used or controlled. The first step was financial. I created a new bank account under only my name, one no one could access but me. I transferred everything I could, froze the old joint account entirely, and filed a fraud claim. The bank sided with me quickly once they saw the pattern of purchases and my complete lack of involvement. Within days, I received confirmation that the stolen money would be refunded. Next, I turned to my digital life. I changed passwords, removed backups, and scrubbed any old shared logins. I went through my files, organizing years of freelance work I'd been neglecting. I cleaned up my resume, updated my portfolio, and sent out a few applications, not because I hated my job, but because for the first time I wanted options. The more I took control, the more a sense of momentum began to grow inside me. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't sudden. It was quiet, steady, like a flame slowly catching. I started taking evening walks, something I hadn't done in years. The movement helped clear my mind. I read again mostly nonfiction about boundaries and family roles. One book had a line I kept rereading. "If someone only loves the version of you they can control that isn't love, it's convenience." I printed the quote and taped it above Daniel's desk where I'd been working remotely. Seeing it each morning helped me remember why I'd left and why I couldn't go back. 2 weeks into this quiet rebuilding, I got a text from Sabrina. "Hey, heard you froze the account. Mom's freaking out." No apology, no recognition that the money was mine, no remorse for spending it. I typed back, "It wasn't yours to use." She replied instantly, "It was Mom's idea. I didn't even know it was your money. Relax." Another message came 2 hours later. "You're really making a big deal out of nothing. I thought we were family." I stared at the screen. Family. That word used to mean something to me. Now it felt like a leash they had wrapped around my neck for years. I didn't respond. Instead, I saved the messages in a new folder on my desktop. I titled it Receipts. Not because I planned to use them yet, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to gaslight myself into believing it hadn't happened. A few days after that, I found a small one-bedroom apartment downtown. It wasn't luxurious peeling paint in the hallway, old cabinets, a squeaky ceiling fan, but it was mine. Mine in a way nothing in that house had ever been. I signed the lease, used the refunded money for the deposit, and moved in the same week. Daniel helped me carry boxes up the narrow stairs, joking about how the building had more personality than drywall. I bought a real bed, a real desk, and a used laptop that didn't overheat every time I opened multiple tabs. I worked harder on my freelance projects and raised my rates slightly. Clients responded well. Work began to flow. I started cooking real meals again. Nothing fancy, but something warm, something grounding. Each night, I felt myself growing stronger, inch by inch. I didn't block my family. I wanted them to see I was doing fine, maybe even better than fine. They needed to understand they no longer had access to the version of me who endlessly forgave them. Eventually, their messages resumed dripping, with a familiar mix of guilt and manipulation. "Your new place looks nice. You didn't invite us to a housewarming. We're still your family, Debra. Sabrina's leaving for college soon. It would mean a lot if you came by." I ignored all of them. 2 days later, Mom finally called. The ringtone made my stomach tighten, but I forced myself to answer. Her voice was clipped, slightly agitated. "I just want to understand why you're being so cold." "You used my money," I replied calmly. "That account was joint," she snapped. "Which you knew. I forgot you were still connected to it." "You didn't forget to use it," I said. "I'm your mother," she said sharply, as if the title excused everything. "You're twisting things." "No," I replied. "I'm seeing things clearly for the first time." Silence stretched heavy and brittle. Then she said in a low voice, "Your sister's leaving soon. You really want to ruin things over a few $100s?" I laughed, not loudly but bitterly. It was never about the money. Then what do you want, Debra, she demanded. An apology, a parade. I wanted you to understand, I said, but you never will. And I hung up. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop. It wasn't a list of grievances or a rant or even a plan. It was a beginning, because I wasn't just rebuilding anymore. I was preparing. Moving into my own apartment felt like stepping into a life I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath waiting for. The first night, I lay on my new mattress still on the floor because I hadn't assembled the frame yet, and stared at the blank ceiling listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere down the block. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine to clean or clutter, mine to wake up in without being asked to pick up someone else's slack, mine to lock behind me without worrying who might rummage through my things. The air felt lighter, sharper, more honest. During the first week, I kept myself busy assembling furniture, arranging boxes, and clearing out the digital debris of my old life. I returned the dustpan my mother had handed me at Sabrina's party symbolically, by hanging my own new one neatly in my closet, solely for my use. I cooked actual meals again, made coffee in the quiet mornings, bought a cheap rug that tied the whole living room together, and felt something in my chest unclench every time I walked from one room to another without hearing someone call my name to do something for them. Then, without planning to, I started dating someone. His name was Evan Wallace, a guy I'd matched with on a dating app months before, back when I was still home but too exhausted to pursue anything. We reconnected casually when he messaged me to ask how I'd been. Normally, I ignored those kinds of messages, but something about him, maybe the timing, maybe the fact that he didn't push, didn't pry, made me respond. Our first date was simple coffee at a quiet cafe, no grand gestures or forced banter, just two people sharing a table. Evan had a calmness about him, a grounded way of listening that made me feel like I didn't need to perform or minimize myself. He didn't pretend to have solutions for everything, and he didn't ask invasive questions about my family. When I finally mentioned I'd moved out, all he said was, "That must have taken strength," and left it at that. We started seeing each other once or twice a week. He worked in marketing, creative but steady, and he talked about his job with a mild enthusiasm that made it clear he liked his life, but didn't need it to define him. He told me about his sister, who he was close with, and how they argued sometimes, but always managed to find their way back. He laughed easily, but not loudly. He made me feel seen, without making me feel exposed. Around our fourth date, he admitted he'd recently run into his ex-girlfriend at a bookstore. "She's doing well," he said simply. But we weren't right for each other. He mentioned it not as drama, not as a warning, but as a quiet truth. I respected that. It made me trust him a little more. In the midst of this new relationship, my life continued to shift. My freelance work picked up at a surprising pace. A marketing agency reached out about a recurring contract, impressed by my portfolio's refresh. Suddenly, my evenings were filled not with dread, but with editing, coding planning, and the sense that I was building something for myself, not patching holes in a life others had poked through. But my family was still a shadow at the edge of all this progress. Sabrina sent a few sporadic messages, mostly irritated. "You didn't even say congrats about my dorm. Mom's upset. You know how she gets. Are you seriously still mad?" I didn't respond. Every message she sent added another piece to the folder on my computer, the one labeled receipts, which had started as a digital archive and slowly evolved into something sharper proof. One night, while going through my documents, I stumbled across something I hadn't thought about in years, my old FAFSA records from college. I'd kept them archived in an old folder I almost never opened. Back then, my parents insisted on filling out everything for me, claiming they knew the numbers better and that it would be faster. I hadn't questioned it. I was 18, overwhelmed and eager to trust that they were helping me. Curious, I opened the files. What I found made my breath catch. The income listed on the forms was significantly lower than I remembered my parents actually making. I remembered the year, clearly new furniture, a pricey dance, intensive for Sabrina, a new set of patio equipment. It didn't make sense. And once I noticed the discrepancy, I couldn't stop looking. I compared the forms to public salary averages for my dad's job, then to property records online, then to another year's tax estimate. The numbers didn't add up. It was one thing to suspect my family had financial favoritism. It was another to discover they had falsified information to secure more aid for me, information that, if repeated for Sabrina, could jeopardize her entire financial package. It was messy, it was risky, it was illegal. And knowing my parents, it was likely. I needed clarity. So I called someone I trusted, Zoe, a law student friend from college, who specialized in education and financial policy. We hadn't talked in months, but she took my call immediately. I explained what I'd found, listing everything in careful detail. Debra, she said after a long pause, this is serious. If those forms were falsified, especially more than once, that's financial aid fraud. If her school finds out, the consequences could be huge. Aid suspension, repayment audits. I don't want to destroy her, I said quietly, even though part of me didn't fully believe it. I know, she replied, but if you're considering doing anything with this, you don't have to be vindictive. You just have to be factual. Zoe offered to help me draft an anonymous submission, something clean, precise, not emotional. Just enough information for Sabrina's university to initiate a review. No personal details, no signatures, no traceable involvement. I didn't send it yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I focused on something immediate, something smaller, symbolic, something that had been dropped into my lap by fate. My cousin Danielle's wedding in late September. The whole family was invited, and for the first time in my life, I planned to show up as someone they hadn't seen before. Evan agreed to go with me without hesitation. If you want support, I'm there, he said simply. No theatrics, no eagerness, just acceptance. On the day of the wedding, I wore a tailored navy dress that fit like it had been made for me. Evan looked sharp in a clean-cut suit, and together we walked into the garden venue with an ease that came from finally feeling like I wasn't shrinking myself for anyone. I wasn't there to make a scene or prove anything. I was there to exist fully, confidently, unapologetically. When my mother saw me, her eyes widened for a moment before she composed herself. Debra, she murmured, her tone wavering just slightly. You look different. I feel different, I said. Throughout the evening, cousins and distant relatives approached me with warm greetings and gentle curiosity, questions about my new place, my work, my life. Mom hovered nearby, like a satellite, trying to reconnect to a signal it no longer controlled. Sabrina glared at me across the room, her expression unreadable behind a tight, brittle smile. By the time Evan and I left, I knew something in the Engel family dynamic had shifted permanently, not because of anything I said, but because of everything I didn't say. The next morning, I opened the anonymous draft Zoe had helped me write, and I pressed send. After I sent the anonymous email to Sabrina's university, I didn't hover over my inbox waiting for something to happen. I didn't check her school's website or scour forums for rumors. It wasn't about watching the consequences unfold. I had spent my entire life watching my family's choices determine my emotional state. I refused to give them that power anymore. Instead, I focused on my life, my apartment, my work, my relationship with Evan. The quiet routines that finally felt like safety. I woke up earlier. I cooked breakfast for myself instead of grabbing something on the way out. I organized my living room, added thrift store plants to the windowsills, bought new bedding that didn't smell like someone else's detergent. Every day I felt myself stepping further into a version of life that didn't involve walking on eggshells. But silence has its own rhythm, its own weight. And a few weeks after sending that anonymous report, the silence broke. It started with a voicemail from my mother. She didn't sound angry or condescending or self-righteous, 3 tones I knew well. She sounded uneasy. Debra, call me back, please. Something happened with Sabrina's financial aid. They're saying there may be discrepancies. We need to talk. I didn't call back. I saved the voicemail and went about my day. 2 days later, another message arrived. This time from a cousin I barely kept up with. Are you okay? Your mom's been telling people you're unstable or something. Just wanted to check on you. I laughed out loud when I read it. My mother adored controlling the narrative. If she couldn't reach me directly, she'd try to reach me sideways through the family tree. The fact that she was starting to spread stories meant the pressure was getting to her. Later that week, I forwarded the voicemail to Zoe. She listened and whistled under her breath. Sounds like they're feeling the heat. Once there's an audit, the university can't unsee things. Do you think it'll be bad? I asked. For Sabrina, maybe. For your parents, definitely. Schools don't like when their funds look misreported. I should have felt guilty. I should have worried for my sister. But guilt had been used against me like a leash for so long that I didn't trust the feeling anymore. And as for Sabrina, she had benefited from a system built on lies. Lies I never asked to be part of. Still, I didn't take pleasure in it. What I felt was something cold, something steady clarity. The fallout didn't come in a dramatic explosion. It arrived in small shockwaves. First came the rumor. Someone posted anonymously on Sabrina's university forum. Heard a rich kid freshman got her aid frozen because her parents messed with income numbers. Anyone know the details? Her name wasn't mentioned, but college students didn't need names to fuel gossip. The comments filled with speculation, some harsh, some mocking. A few even tagged the dorm group chat she was in. Then came the phone call from Dad. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. I wanted to hear how he'd spin things. "Debra," he said, voice tight, "we need to talk." "That seems to be a theme lately," I replied. He ignored the jab. "We know what you did." "Do you?" I asked because it was interesting to hear him guess. "You've been digging," he snapped. "Looking into our finances, stirring things up, playing with things you don't understand." There was fear in his voice. Not protectiveness, not anger, but fear. The kind of fear that comes from being caught doing something you always assumed you'd get away with. "Let me make this simple," I said. "You stole from me. You used my account. You lied on federal forms. I understand plenty." "You're part of this family," he hissed. "You don't go airing dirty laundry to strangers." "I'm not part of your family anymore," I said calmly. His breath hitched. "You're hurting your sister." "No," I answered. "I stopped shielding her from the consequences of your choices." He hung up on me. Within hours, Sabrina messaged me. "You ruined everything. They're reviewing my aid. Mom is crying. Dad's blaming me. Please tell me you didn't do anything." Then another message. I didn't know about the FAFSA stuff. It was them. "Why are you punishing me?" I didn't respond. I read each message, let them settle, and archived them into the folder labeled Receipts. If she truly didn't know, then this wasn't punishment. It was exposure. And if she did know, then she was simply facing a fraction of the consequences I'd carried alone for years. In the meantime, my life kept rising from the ashes of the old one. My freelance business took off. I landed a long-term contract that paid more than my previous job combined with all my side gigs. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't just earning enough to get by. I was earning enough to breathe. I quit my day job, walked out of the office with a small box of belongings and an overwhelming sense of relief, and stepped fully into self-employment. When I told Evan, he hugged me and said, "I'm proud of you." Simple, genuine, free of the comparison or resentment or conditionality. My parents had always wrapped affection in like fine print. I started going to a weekly running club. I joined a board game night. I bought myself a set of real pots and pans instead of the mismatched hand-me-downs my mother gave me when I first moved home after college. I even signed up for a financial literacy course, partly curiosity, partly determination, to never let anyone manage my money again. But as my life grew, the distance from my family became even clearer. Their messages came less frequently, but more desperately. "Your sister might lose her dorm. Why are you doing this to us? We're still your parents. You need to come home before things get worse." Not once did they say, "We're sorry." The last message I got from Sabrina came on a Sunday morning. They pulled me from my dorm list. They said it's pending an administrative review. I'm freaking out. "Please, Debra, if you know anything, help me." I saved it without replying. Evan noticed my quietness that day. "You okay?" he asked as we walked along the waterfront. "I'm fine," I said, though a storm of emotions churned beneath the surface. Not guilt, not anger. Something closer to grieving a family that never existed in the first place. He didn't press. He just walked beside me, matching my pace. Weeks passed, and the fallout deepened. My parents withdrew from social events. Relatives whispered. Sabrina became a ghost on social media. Her college friends posted photos without her. One cousin messaged me saying Sabrina had been crying during a family group call, claiming someone close betrayed them. But by then, even those messages felt distant. One evening around Christmas time, my mother finally sent something that wasn't a demand or accusation. It was a photo of a handmade family ornament, 4 little reindeer, with our names written on them. Hers, Dad's, Sabrina's, and the 4th one missing. Her text read, "I took yours off this year. It didn't feel right." I stared at the message for a long time, waiting for something to hurt some old wound to flare. Nothing. The silence inside me wasn't cold anymore. It was calm. For the first time in my life, my family had no power over me, and they knew it. The fallout didn't arrive like a storm, loud, sudden, violent. It showed up slowly, quietly, the way rot spreads beneath a floorboard until the wood collapses. For weeks after my mother sent that final ornament photo, I waited for something inside me to react. Anger, sadness, regret, something. But the longer I stared at her message, the more I realized there was nothing left to pull from. They had taken so much from me over the years, affection, energy, money, identity, that by the time I finally walked away, there simply wasn't anything left for them to tug on. And strangely, that emptiness felt like peace. Life kept moving around me, and for the first time, I wasn't trailing behind. My weekends were full runs at the botanical garden, cooking nights with Evan, board game meetups, occasional day trips to nearby towns. I wasn't fixated on the situation with my family anymore. It existed like a chapter I had finished reading, but hadn't quite shelved yet. But the consequences of that chapter continued unfolding without my involvement. By late January, word had spread through the extended family circle that something was wrong with the Engels. My mother, who had always been so meticulous about how people perceived us, couldn't keep up with the narrative anymore. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years began sending short, tentative messages. "Hey, is everything okay? Heard there's been some trouble. Hope you're doing all right. Your mom seemed off at Thanksgiving." I didn't respond to most of them, not out of spite, but because I didn't know how to explain my family without unraveling the years of minimizing I had trained myself to do. How do you tell people who only saw staged Christmas cards and Facebook highlight reels that the house they admired was built on manipulation, resentment, and the casual kind of cruelty that looks normal from the outside? Meanwhile, the situation with Sabrina worsened. Zoe updated me periodically. She had a friend in the education law department at Sabrina's university, someone far removed enough to keep confidentiality, but close enough to understand the bureaucratic process. According to her, Sabrina's aid had indeed been flagged, formally triggering a full financial aid compliance review. Not just Sabrina's forms, my old files were part of it too. The university had no choice. If 1 year showed discrepancies, they had to review the family's entire aid history. Zoe explained it in calm, clinical terms, but even then I knew what that meant. It wasn't just Sabrina's freshman year package in jeopardy. It was the credibility of every financial claim my parents had made for nearly a decade. "They'll get audited," Zoe said. "The school will request tax records for multiple years. If the numbers don't match, FAFSA will open a case." "What happens then?" I asked. "It varies," she replied. "Loss of aid, repayment, penalties, possible tax issues, but you're not responsible for any of it." For the first time, I didn't feel dread. I just felt distance. Evan asked me one night while we were making dinner, "Do you want to talk to them or hear their side?" I shook my head. Their side is whatever makes them look right. He nodded, accepting that without trying to fix it. That was something I loved about him, his quiet understanding. He never treated my pain like a puzzle he had to solve. He just let me exist without shrinking. A few weeks later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I assumed it was spam and ignored it, but it called again and again. By the third time, I silenced it out of irritation, only for a voicemail notification to appear. I should have ignored it, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. I pressed play. "Debra, it's Dad." A pause, a shaky breath. "We need to talk. Things are bad. They're reviewing everything. Taxes, income, all of it. And Sabrina..." Another pause, as if he was gathering the courage to say the next part. "She might have to take a leave from school. It's complicated. If you know anything, if you did something, just call me. We can fix this." The voicemail ended abruptly. I sat on my couch, the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. There it was, the moment my father, the man who always claimed to know everything, finally sounded lost. His authority, his confidence, his certainty, it all cracked in that voice message. But I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not vindication, just the same calm quiet that had followed me for months. I didn't respond. Instead, I slid the message into the receipts folder. A week later, Sabrina messaged me again, this time at 2 a.m. "They're pulling everything. I might lose my spot. Can you please talk to them? They said you're the reason this is happening. Just tell the truth. I'm begging you." I read the message slowly. Once I would have crumbled under the guilt. Once I would have driven home in the middle of the night to comfort her, to shield her, to take on responsibilities that weren't mine. Now I just sighed, because the truth was simple. I didn't ruin anything. I stopped hiding it. I saved her messages with the others and blocked her number, not out of anger, but self-preservation. I didn't want to give them access to pull me back into their orbit. I didn't need their chaos anymore. Spring arrived, and with it, a lightness in the air that mirrored how I felt inside. My apartment finally looked like a home. Work was steady. Evan and I had settled into a rhythm that felt warm and real. I laughed more. I slept more deeply. I went entire days without thinking about my parents. Then, one afternoon, while watering the plants by my window, I finally understood something I had never been allowed to understand growing up. Leaving wasn't the revenge, healing was. I hadn't set out to dismantle my family's facade. I hadn't planned to expose their fraud or unravel their financial stability. All I had done was step away, step out of the role they'd forced me into, and let the truth speak louder than my silence ever could. My mother wanted me to feel guilty for the ornament. My father wanted me to feel responsible for the review. Sabrina wanted me to feel like her struggles were my fault. But none of those things belonged to me anymore. The last time they had power over me was the night of her graduation. The dustpan, the car, the silence. Now I wasn't there to sweep up anyone's mess. Eventually, I stopped checking the receipts folder, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need the record anymore. I lived it, I survived it, I was done letting it define me. Months later, I walked through a local park on a warm evening, holding Evan's hand, listening to the chatter of families and the distant bark of dogs. For the first time, I felt fully present, not braced for the next criticism, not waiting to be dismissed, not shrinking to fit around someone else's ego. We stopped near a pond, the surface reflecting streaks of gold from the setting sun. I watched the water ripple gently, peaceful and undisturbed. Evan squeezed my hand. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "I'm good." And I meant it. I didn't look back. Not because I was afraid to, but because there was nothing behind me worth returning to.